Hi, I'm Troy Klein, bringing you another Sun-Earth Day connection. As a reminder, Sun-Earth Day happens on or near the spring equinox. However, many people celebrate Sun-Earth Day throughout the year. I'm here with my friends at the NASA Edge studio. Hey.
Hey, Troy, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
Yeah, it's great to have you here.
And the letter of the day is H.
For Hinode.
Hinode. And what does Hinode mean?
It means sunrise.
I've always been impressed with your ability to do amazing graphics like that. I would never have.
We're going retro graphics.
It looks real.
But you know, as much fun we are having with this,
yes,
we wouldn't have these cool images if
Absolutely.
it weren't for the series of sun satellites, of which Hinode is one, to send back incredible data.
Now, we saw two cool videos of Hinode already, and we're going to be seeing this third one. What's on tap for this third video?
Well, in this one, we'll be talking about how Hinode explores the atmosphere of the sun and how it's helping us to improve our understanding of the solar atmosphere, which I find really fascinating because most people don't realize that we on Earth live within the atmosphere of the sun.
Right.
Yeah, well, that's what space weather is all about,
exactly.
too.
But I think it's also important, too, is that, I think a lot of people out there, and I could be totally wrong, but a lot of people out there just sort of see us as taking satellites, putting them up in low Earth orbit and studying the Earth. But we have a train, quote unquote, a train of satellites that's studying the sun as well.
That's right. And this video is exceptional. I can't wait for you to see what's inside this one.
Well, and plus you have that on the website, there's that viewer, and you see all these different images. You
That's right.
wouldn't if you didn't have
Right.
all these different satellites that can take different analytical looks
That's
at what's
right.
going on the sun.
And that's the Space Weather Media Viewer, which it's new and improved, just released, and it's awesome.
It is awesome. I actually witnessed some solar activity earlier during
That's
prep,
right.
so it was
because
really cool.
all the data that comes in, all of the imagery that comes in is near real time, so it's no more usually than about 2 hours old.
Well, let's check out the video.
Yeah.
Let's do.
All right.
All right.
Our sun provides us with the light and heat we need to keep warm and grow the crops we need to survive. It makes possible the very existence of life on this planet. It is the ultimate battery that drives our climate and our energy needs. And, like an electric current, its overload can plunge us into darkness. On Friday, March 10th, a powerful explosion on the sun launched a cloud of gas from active region 5395, a sunspot group nearly dead center on the sun and over 3 Earths in diameter. The storm cloud rushed out from the sun at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and on the evening of Monday, March the 12th, it struck Earth's magnetic field.
Millions of people in Alaska, Canada, and Scandinavia were treated to a spectacular auroral display that night that lasted from sunset until midnight.
A spectacular light show took the skies as far south as Florida and Cuba. The vast majority of people in the Northern Hemisphere had never seen such a spectacle in recent times. Some even worried that a nuclear first strike might be in progress. Silently, the storm had impacted the magnetic field of the Earth and caused continent-wide electrical currents to flow in the ground.
The expanding ring of storm currents created by the northern lights swooped downwards in latitude deep into North America. This caused continent-wide electrical currents to flow in the ground beneath the Gawker's feet. The currents eventually found harbor in the electrical systems of the United Kingdom, the United States, and Canada.
At 2:44:16 a.m. on March 13th, all was well as power engineers operated the Hydro-Quebec power grid. They had resigned themselves to yet another night of watching power loads come and go during the off-peak hours. The engineers didn't know, however, that for the last half hour, their entire system had been under attack by powerful Earth currents. A power grid consists of hundreds of electrical generation plants, thousands of transformers that boost the voltages to send the current along transmission lines, tens of thousands of substations that step down the voltages, and millions of power poles that serve to connect the substations to the customers. This entire network must be maintained or regulated to a fixed voltage so that the power is moved efficiently. The large transformers are grounded to the Earth, and this provides a pathway for magnetic storm Earth currents to enter the network.
If the storm is strong enough, the network loses its regulation, and this can cause damage to costly transformers that take weeks to repair or even years to replace.
Since magnetic storms cover millions of square kilometers, entire power grids can be shut down, causing major blackouts. At 2:44:17 a.m., these currents found a weak spot in a sprawling North American power grid located in Quebec. A 100-ton static VAR capacitor, number 12, at the Chibougamau substation, tripped and went offline as harmonic currents caused protective relays to sense overload conditions. At 2:44:19 a.m., 2 seconds later, the loss of voltage regulation at Chibougamau caused power swings and a reduction of power generation in the 735,000-volt La Grande transmission network. At 2:44:46 a.m. and 150 kilometers away at the Albanel and Nemiskow stations, 4 more capacitors went offline. The last station to fall at 2:45:16 a.m. was the La Vérendrye complex to the south of Chibougamau. The fate of the network had been sealed in barely 59 seconds as the entire 9,460 megawatt output from Hydro-Quebec's La Grande hydroelectric complex found itself without proper regulation. Lasting 75 seconds from start to finish, the cascading events traveled much too fast in space and time for human operators to react. But it was more than enough time for 21 billion watts of badly needed electrical power to suddenly disappear from service. The nighttime temperature in Toronto was 19 degrees Fahrenheit, or -7 degrees Celsius. So the loss of electric power was felt very dramatically as most people woke up to cold homes for breakfast.
Over 3 million people live near Montreal, the second largest metropolitan area in Canada, where nearly half the population of Quebec resides.
Montreal is famous for its 30 kilometers of underground walkways linking 60 buildings, 2 universities, and thousands of shops and businesses. Over 500,000 people use this system each day to avoid the freezing cold winter air. Pedestrians suddenly found themselves plunged into complete darkness with only the feeble battery-powered safety lights to guide them to the surface. The presses at the Montreal Gazette had been rolling at breakneck speed that night to print the Monday newspaper for its 195,000 subscribers. The sudden loss of power caused the huge rolls of paper, each weighing several tons, to come to a sudden halt, shredding paper in a storm of debris and jamming the presses. The blackout also closed schools and businesses, kept the Montreal Metro shut down during the morning rush hour, and paralyzed Dorval Airport, delaying dozens of flights. Without their navigation radar in operation, no flight could land or take off until power had been restored. People ate their cold breakfasts in the dark and left for work. They soon found themselves stuck in congested traffic. Motorists tried to navigate darkened intersections without any streetlights or traffic control systems operating. Thanks to working emergency generators, no major problems were reported for most of Montreal's hospitals, although the Montreal Children's Hospital canceled all elective surgery. A more urgent situation did arise at the Saint-Luc Hospital when 4 patients in intensive care had to have air pumped into their lungs manually. Like most modern cities, people work round the clock, and in the early morning hours of March 13, the swing shift staffed many office buildings in the caverns of downtown Montreal. All these buildings were now pitch dark, stranding workers in dark offices, stairwells, and elevators. The Quebec blackout cost businesses tens of millions of dollars as it stalled production, idled workers, and spoiled products. By 10 a.m., power had been restored to most of the customers in Quebec. And by 11 a.m. on March 14, all but 3,500 of the 842,000 customers were back in business. Almost immediately, in the daily papers on March 14th, The cause was attributed by scientists and engineers to a magnetic storm, and the cause of the blackout switched to an act of God event for which Hydro-Quebec could not be held entirely responsible. I recently spoke with electric power engineer John Beland at Hydro-Quebec about the 1989 blackout.
In the following weeks after the 1989 event, corrective action has been the decision to use space weather forecasting services. This service will alert the operator that something is coming or might be coming with a given probability, a given severity, and then the operator can be prepared to take corrective action against the geomagnetic storm.
The National Research Council in Ottawa issued a warning to the utility about the impending magnetic storm 6 days before the event arrived. To its credit, Hydro-Quebec heeded these warnings and recommendations and reduced the power by 10% as a precaution.
Yet pointing a finger at the sun was not considered a credible explanation by a population unfamiliar with the effects that solar storms are capable of.
Although this historic blackout was largely a local political and economic event for Quebec, it served as a major wake-up call for the United States.
We have Dr. Sten Odenwald online with us right now, who is not only the producer of the Hinode vodcast series, but he's also one of our NASA astronomers.
Thank you for that wonderful, glowing introduction.
And a longtime friend of NASA Edge and formerly of NASA Connect and NASA Sci-Files in the glory days.
And certainly when I can't answer a question, he's the go-to guy.
That's right.
We send the emails along to the guy with knowledge.
So between the two of you, you know everything.
Oh, yeah. Every time we get an astronomy question on the Edge, I send it straight to Sten.
Straight to Sten,
Yeah.
so do I. Hey, Sten, what can you tell us about this satellite? There's so much about it that's new that we're really waiting to hear about.
I've been doing these podcasts to basically rekindle the interest in space weather issues because we're at sunspot minimum right now. So I thought that with Hinode, which is a solar observing satellite looking at flares and things, that it made sense to talk about extreme space weather events, like the kind, extreme sports and, extreme eating habits of the rich and famous. Well, this is sort of extreme space weather events. This one is about the great Quebec blackout in 1989, March 13th. We've learned an awful lot about what space weather can do to clean our clocks in the last 20 years.
Yeah, I remember reading about that in your book, The 23rd Cycle.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that's what magnetosference comes out of. I mean, being able to monitor these kinds of things and better prepare so that, we don't have the same kind of consequence that we had back in '89.
That's right, and if everybody remembers, magnetosference is a term coined by our very own Blair.
That's right.
It really is sort of interesting. I'm actually more impressed that we haven't had more blackouts from solar storms, but we've learned quite a lot about how to build electrical systems and satellites in the face of extreme space weather events.
Now, I see here that you said that the Quebec blackout solar storm is not one of the biggest ones we've experienced in the last 100 years. Is that right?
That's correct. The deal is, though, that we've had different types of technologies in the past, and some of them were sufficiently primitive that you'd really have to whack them hard in order for them to do anything. For instance, telegraph systems. We don't use telegraph much anymore, but for 100 years it was sort of the popular mode of communication, and it turned out to be actually rather sensitive to geomagnetic storms. I mean, you typically have, several hundred volts of voltage on these telegraph lines, shorting out telegraph sets and giving people nasty burns, while sending messages to grandma on Halloween, or whatever. And, now we don't have that technology, but we have other kinds of technology that have proved themselves to be also pretty sensitive to space weather. Of course, all of our communication satellites rock and roll when there's a really big space weather event.
Isn't that one of the things that this data will do, though, and better understanding the solar activity and how we're impacted by it?
Yeah, absolutely. The deal is that we can't get out of the way from this garbage.
Right.
We can't move the planet out of the way of a coronal mass ejection. So the only hope that we have is to be able to forecast these things, to look at the sun, see what's going on there, and to plug all the data into a model to forecast, what's going to happen in 2 or 3 days. That gives us enough time to, deal with satellites, put them in safe modes, handle our electric power grids and all of that. So that's why so much of the emphasis is on understanding the basic physics of space weather. Because only after you understand, how the dominoes fall can you actually set up and create a predictive model that people can use.
I mean, couldn't it essentially in itself be a security threat in that, let's say if we had a major substorm hit us and it affected the communications, for the airline industry here in the United States and it shut everything down. I mean, can you imagine having 4,000 or 5,000 planes up at once and all of a sudden blackout?
Well, that's absolutely true. And, these are not theoretical issues. These are all, identified hazards. We had during World War II, there were shortwave blackouts going on all the time from solar storms, and so the Allied forces had to work around, losing shortwave communication, with headquarters as part of, handling the war. For airline crews and flights, well, in the next 10 years, we're going to go to almost all GPS for navigation on commercial airlines from takeoff to landing. Now, GPS satellites and position information is terribly sensitive to space weather events, mainly because the ionosphere gets disturbed. So, it's something to consider as a hazard, and that's why predicting when bad things are going to happen is so vitally important. And that's why satellites like Hinode are up there busily working, gathering the data.
How would you rate the predictability we have for space weather right now? I mean, it seems like you hear that we get a 2 or 3 day, heads up, if you will.
Right.
Is that accurate?
We've gotten really good at that, mainly because we can actually photograph or image the plasma as it's coming off of the sun.
Now, given the information you have, especially with some of the books that you've written, I understand there's some debate on this next solar cycle or our next solar maximum. What do you think is going to happen? What's the likely scenario?
And when does it begin?
Yeah, well, it's, technically, it's sort of already started. We are in sunspot minimum and starting to slowly and very sluggishly come out of it. It's been an unusually long sunspot minimum, which is what gives forecasters the idea that maybe the next cycle isn't going to be nearly as strong as the past one was that we just went through. But it's predicting how big the next cycle is going to be, is more an art form than it is, a hard and fast prediction at this point.
It's like predicting the weather here on Earth.
Well, that's exactly right, except, in New England, you wait 5 minutes and it's a different pattern, but, here you have to wait 11 years.
Right.
So,
and plus, you can't go out and say, I witness weather when you're talking about space weather. It's kind of a bad thing.
No, but there is something interesting about getting the imagery from the sun, from these satellites, in any kind of advanced format. That's going to be beneficial.
Absolutely.
So having these satellites certainly helps out in terms of our ability to be able to prepare, which sounds like something that we really need to pay attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. And understanding a lot about how flares work, how magnetic energy is converted into particle energy, which then becomes the radiation that satellites are affected by. It's all a very complicated thing, and we're still, I think, decades away from really understanding the subtleties. Mainly because the sun is a chaotic system fundamentally. I mean, it's not one, that works well with predictive models. I mean, there's always some element of randomness in how things work.
And in fact, just on a side note, by 2020, when we go back to the moon, Blair wants to be the first meteorite on the lunar surface, and so I have a feeling we're going to have our first solar Blair, which might pose a hazard to Earth, since it's only 2 to 3 days away.
Causing quite a bit of magnetosference.
Absolutely.
I create the term magnetosference, but I actually generate legitimate magnetosference. The convergence of thoughts here is frightening.
That's right.
Yeah. Well.